On today's Locked On Thunder podcast, is this the best Thunder team of all time? What will be considered a successful season at the end, and what questions are still left to be answered?
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, media member, and beat writer for Thunder on SI, Rylan Stiles. Follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LOThunderPod. Email the show, LOThunderPod@gmail.com. On today's show, we're diving into the Oklahoma City Thunder and their historic start to the season. Will they be the best team in Thunder history? What is a successful season for the Oklahoma City Thunder, and what questions are left to be answered? We're here talking with Joe Mussatto of the Oklahoman to discuss all of this. And Joe, before the season even began, you were talking about this team having the potential to be one of the best Thunder teams ever. They certainly got here in an interesting way.
Yeah, I did not. I would have had a bolder prediction, Rylan, had I said they're going to be the best Thunder team ever, and their second best player is going to miss a majority of the season. There's going to be guys in and out of the lineup, and still they're going to demolish the rest of the NBA. That would have been an accurate prediction, because it's crazy. I mean, looking at the potential of this team, I thought it did have the team to be the best in Thunder history. When you look at kind of the underlying numbers, I mean, last year's team was so good. I expected this team to be even better, but you look at the route in which they got there, and it's like, you can't just say in a vacuum, this is the best Thunder team ever, which, they are by regular season standards. You almost have to throw in all the context, because it makes it even more impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of what gets lost nationally is not having all the context of, I think sometimes you can look at the standings and just say, well, this team, they're so good. They're the number one team in the West going away, but that's kind of what we thought would happen. But we never would have thought that this would have happened had we known in the preseason that you deal with all of these injuries. And I think that this team is the best team in Thunder history, statistically, record-wise. I think it will be when it's all said and done. But then also just its functionality on the court feels a lot more cohesive, feels a lot more planned out, if you will, than previous Thunder teams. Like, where are you at in terms of just the eye test instead of just the numbers?
Well, I definitely think that's true. I mean, even going back to the Thunder's heyday of the early 2010s, I think, obviously they're fond memories of those teams, and those teams were terrific, but there was always like lingering questions about the fit between Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant. Obviously, before that, there was the drama of the James Harden trade. Westbrook grew into a really big personality at times. Kevin Durant would defer. There were questions, real or not, about how they got along. And it's like, all of that stuff to the side, we're not talking about any of that. Maybe it'll come. It might come one day. These guys are all still young, but they're still in that, the Thunder U 2.0 phase before things get messy. I mean, these guys obviously love playing together. You can see that with the post-game interviews and just the way they interact on the floor, in the press conferences after the game. And it sounds cheesy. It is cheesy, but I think it's true. That there's just really there's nothing that's like, there's no like fissures that I think could, even show a crack this year. Maybe it's going to happen in the future, but you've got a cohesive unit. They play brilliant basketball. The on-court product, for like, Kevin Durant is probably my favorite player in NBA history to watch play basketball. But as far as the game as a whole goes, I think this is a much prettier brand of basketball the Thunder is playing now, even when they did at their apex.
Yeah, it certainly is a better brand, a better product. And I think that Shai, it's kind of incredible, Joe, that, rightfully so, whenever the Thunder, didn't have Kevin Durant anymore, didn't have Russ anymore, we all kind of just thought, well, that's probably like the best that the team can do, and they probably will struggle to get players that good again because like that run, there are some franchises who have been around longer than the Thunder have been in Oklahoma City that they still don't have guys of that nature. And then they trade for Shai, and just documenting his career. I mean, you were the Thunder beat writer, now you're the columnist. Like you've seen how when he first came over here, he was a fun player to have in that trade, a fun young player. Then he became a borderline all-star. Then he became a real all-star. Then he became an all-star starter. Then he became an MVP candidate. And then he became the front runner now for the MVP. And every year along that journey, he was kind of viewed as like, well, he certainly can't get better than this. And then he did get better, and he got better this year as well. Like getting a player like Shai, I think just shows you how lucky and how fortunate and how spoiled that this franchise is, because there are really some teams in the NBA like the Hornets who have not had three guys of this stature before. And Shai has quickly put himself in that Kevin Russ conversation of top of the line guys, and you don't have to parse through who's better or worse, but he's a bona fide number one option on a team that can win a title. He's a bona fide MVP candidate.
Rylan, you said most teams don't have, three guys of this caliber. Most teams don't have one guy of this caliber. I mean, this would be 3 MVPs in 17 years. And it's not like one guy won all 3. It would be 3 different players to win an MVP in the organization's 17 years of existence. It is just crazy. Shai's path has been remarkable. I mean, there's some guys that are almost like predetermined to be great. Like Luka's one of those guys. LeBron was one of those guys. And then there's the Shais of the world where you just don't see it coming. I mean, Jokic, where you just don't see it coming. Shai was a good but not top tier prospect, coming out of high school. He doesn't even start at Kentucky initially. He, first year in the NBA, he flashes some stuff, especially in that Clippers first round series against the Warriors. When we talk about the haul that OKC got from the Clippers, initially we put the picks first and then Shai. And now it's the other way around. And that's not discounting how valuable these picks are, including one that became Jalen Williams. But Shai has just totally changed the trajectory. I mean, you look at, I think of like the Thunder triumvirate of Sam Presti, Mark Degnalt, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Those are the 3 guys that have gotten the Thunder to this point to be title contenders again.
And those are the 3 guys who feel really stable. Like it feels like you have a good feel that they're all on the same page. And we've seen across the NBA this season how if you don't have a trio like that, where your head coach, your GM, and your star player are not all on the same page, all working in unison, it can get really messy. It can get really off the rails. But from everything that we know, it feels like they're all on the same page. They're all perfectly aligned, and they can continue to grow this thing for many, many years to come. Joe, it's kind of crazy that they have this expectation level, and we're going to discuss what makes a successful year for the Thunder, and then realizing it's their second ever crack at the postseason. Like this is their second ever time going into playoff series. They went to the play-in, lost in the play-in tournament, went and last year we saw them sweep the Pelicans and go wide, go toe-to-toe with Dallas. And now it's all on them in terms of expectation level, in terms of trying to win a championship. They're the favorites in the West. It's all happening so fast that you kind of have to sometimes remind yourself of this is not the end of the journey. Like this is just still the beginning parts of figuring out just how good this team can be and enjoying how set up for success that they are for the future. But Joe, coming up, what will make this year a success and what questions are still left to be answered, even though this team's off to a historic start? Today's show is brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. With the games tipping off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on the action at FanDuel than America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss opening tip-off, you can bet on a fourth quarter comeback. You can stay in the action, and if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Check them out today because I love using FanDuel to make these games more interesting, more entertaining. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet if it wins. So go to FanDuel.com right now, join today, and at FanDuel.com, you'll get a shot at $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. You can already go check out some lines out of the All-Star break, including when the Phoenix Suns head to San Antonio in a pivotal play-in race. The Suns are 2.5-point favorites over the Suns. Go check them out today at FanDuel.com. We're back on the Lockdown Thunder podcast, on the Lockdown Podcast Network, your teams every day. Here with Joe Mussatto from the Oklahoma and OKC Dream Team, where you can find both of us. Joe, it's tough for me to discuss expectations, to discuss what marks success for this Thunder team. Because, yes, on paper, in my opinion, they're the best team in the Western Conference. And on paper, they should win the Western Conference. And if they fall short of doing that, there will be at least a tinge of disappointment. But then the realistic part of you, and like the part of you who has seen the NBA unfold for many, many years, you know that it takes a long time to be able to get over that hump. It takes a long time to be able to climb that mountain, as Sam Presti would say. So if they can't do it in their second ever postseason run, it's not a disaster. And so that's kind of where I land of like, yes, it'd be disappointing to have all this build up to go to see this team go through all this adversity and yet still come out as the clear-cut #1 team, and then they don't go win the West. But it would be far from a disaster. Like, I think the only disastrous thing would be like an 07 Dirk like situation where like the Mavs were able to go to the #1 overall seed. They were able to have Dirk as the MVP, and then they lost in the first round to the We Believe Warriors. But like, I don't see that happening either. So it's tough to gauge just what would make this a true success, because it feels like anything short of winning the West is going to leave people unsatisfied, which I still find it a little bit unfair to a team this young and this good. Where are you at with how you're going to look at this season when it's all said and done?
The Thunder's put us in a tough spot, Rylan. I mean, like, this is like, it's so hard to talk about them because you look at it through two ways, which you laid out beautifully. Is we know that teams don't win a championship on their second try in the playoffs after, not even making it to the conference finals the year before. Boston's the great example. You knock on the door until you finally burst right through the thing. But then on the other hand, you look at what we've been talking about, best team in Thunder history, maybe the best regular season team by net rating of all time. And then you look at that and say, well, they should win it, or they should at least make it to the NBA finals. And like, one of those things is not going to be true. And I'm curious to see which one it is. I think you used two words that began with DIS, disaster and disappointment. And I think those are like good to distinguish this Thunder team, because it would be a disappointment, I think, if they did not make it to the NBA finals. I think just with how dominant they've been this season, it'd be a disappointment. I think like you'd kind of be kidding yourself if you think otherwise. I think the Thunder would be disappointed, but it's not a disaster. It's not even close to a disaster, because you look at all the years to come, and I know you can't really do this. Windows are open for, much shorter than we usually think they are. But like, this is just the beginning. This is their second playoff run. If they don't win it, if they don't make the NBA finals even this year, it's not a disaster. But because of how dominant they've been atop the West, and like, we go back and forth on who's their biggest threat in the West. And the real answer is there shouldn't really be there's not a clear biggest threat, and they're clearly the best team. So they should come out of the West. But then you get back to their age, experience, haven't done it before. So yeah, it's like it's a conundrum, Rylan.
It is. We're in between a rock and a hard place. And there's a couple of things here. Like, number one, if they went and won a title, they would be a clear anomaly. And we would marvel at the fact that they have just bucked NBA history. They have been able to overcome something we thought was once impossible. And so it's hard for me to grade them on that scale of you got to either be an anomaly and you've got to just take a leak on 50, 70 years of NBA history, or else you're a failure. And to me, that's really tough to put on this team. But every game that passes by, every mark that they hit, it's oh, they're now in this stat category, and every other team in that stat category has won an NBA title. And it's just this weird place to be in. And your point about windows, it is true that the windows aren't open as long as you think that they are. And some of that, though, is based upon not having that holy trinity, so to say, that we discussed in the first segment. Like Dallas, for example, their window would have been open. Nico Harrison did something just insanely ridiculous in trading Luka Doncic.
And we should include a fourth too, because
ownership.
Patrick Dumont versus Clay Bennett, who you never hear about. He's sitting courtside every game on the baseline, but that's the only time you hear about him, and that's the way it needs to be for ownership.
Yeah, and you just look at Sam Presti's history, and as much as you can pick apart what he has done, what he hasn't done, the bottom line is that Kevin Durant was in town for 9 seasons. And outside of, the rookie season in Seattle, outside of that first season in Oklahoma City, they had a chance. They had a chance every year, and their best chance was Kevin's last ever year, where, sorry to open up old wounds, but you blew a 3-1 lead against a historic Warriors team. What is there in the sense of to say about that whenever, from Sam's perspective, he kept the window open a decade to go try to win a title. And so you have to have faith that they'll be able to manage all of this. And if you really look at the nerdy stuff too, and not just the on-court product, they've positioned themselves extremely well with these contracts. They've positioned themselves really well with what they're going to do this summer, to where you just have to believe that they're going to keep this window open, keep this team together. And you have to believe that Sam Presti is going to make the adjustments. Because what I think, Joe, if this team falls short of going to the NBA Finals, so because once you get there, I think that's a success, win or lose.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But if you fall short of getting there, I think there's going to be a clear reason why. Because there's no clear-cut favorite, because there's no clear-cut contender, or there's no clear-cut bad matchup for the Thunder where it's they ran into the team that they couldn't really match up with. If they fall short of winning the West, it'll be because, the role players still can't shoot under the bright lights, and we're talking about that kind of stuff. Or it'll be because, you see something else unfold that's really explainable. You can put a pin in what it was that unraveled them. And we just saw last year that when they lost to Dallas, they got exposed with their lack of front court depth. They had a Josh Giddey problem. Sam Presti goes out immediately, days after the season ends, and goes and fixes both those problems. And so he still has the assets to go do that. So, for example, if they get to the playoffs, and really the only thing I ever hear people talk about when they're trying to paint a picture of the Thunder not winning the West is, do you really trust Wiggins to shoot the ball well? Do you really trust Joe to shoot the ball well, etc.? Okay, if that does play out, guess who's still in Brooklyn right now and did not get traded this week? Cam Johnson. And guess who'd be on line one when the transaction window opens this summer? Probably Brooklyn. Just like Chicago was on line one as soon as you could trade Josh Giddey for Alex Caruso. He's proven to you he'll go make the changes. He'll go improve the team. So I just struggle to think that the window won't be open as long as we think it will. I think that you're going to have a pretty lengthy run here in Oklahoma City. And so it's also not all in this year. And then to really drive home the point of young teams, the last 2 champions, Denver and Boston, the day after they won the title, what was the big storyline? This is the next NBA dynasty. Mm-hmm. This is the next team that's going to run this league. Okay. 12 months before they won the title, what was being said about both those teams? For Denver, Jokic can't really win in the playoffs. He just lost in the first round.
Yeah.
Denver's just this team that keeps hitting their head against the wall, and they can't get through with Jokic. He's got to play better defense. There's all these problems with Jokic. And then 12 months before Boston won it, you got to break up the Jays. Tatum and Brown cannot work together. This is awful. You have to do something. You can't just keep going to this postseason and having these great regular seasons and then seeing the Jays fail together. You can't keep doing that. And yet now that they've won one, the whole conversation changes and everything is so different. And every team's had to go through that. You look at LeBron James, like one of the best players. He's either the best player or the second best player to ever play the sport. I don't really care where you put him, but he's one of the two best players. He was a laughing stock in terms of winning big games all the way through 2011, whenever he lost to the Mavericks. And now all of a sudden, right? Like you have LeBron James. Well, he's just going to walk to the NBA Finals. Like they traded for Luka. Who cares if they have no center? Who cares if they have no defense? They're gonna be a huge threat in the West now because they have LeBron, they have Luka, and so you're gonna have to go through that like everyone else went through, and you're going through it right now. I mean, you're seeing how the Thunder are being discounted, and the only reason they're being discounted is not for anything they've done this year. It's for what happened in Dallas 12 months ago, 8 months ago, 9 months ago, whenever it was. And that's just the par for the course with NBA history. And once they win, whether they win it this year or they win it next year, the year after that, or the year after that, once they win, they'll get that same tagline that Denver and Boston got of, man, look at the Thunder. I mean, holy cow, who could have seen this coming? The next dynasty.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point. But what kind of struck me as you were saying that is like what we thought might have kept the Nuggets from winning a title. Like you got to have better interior defense. Like Jokic is special offensively, but can't carry a defense to the NBA championship. That was like a legitimate concern. Maybe the Jays fit wasn't legitimate, but gosh, we had heard about it for years. And it's like with the Thunder, we're thinking like, what if their role players don't shoot it well? That's such like small potatoes compared to the things that we thought might have kept those other teams back. I think the bigger thing, honestly, is, how J-Dub, responds to, understandably, in his second season, what was a rough playoff debut. How back to normal does Chet look by the time the playoffs roll around? Like that's what's going to matter the most. But even if they quote unquote fail and don't win the championship, which we both agree isn't a failure, I think if you even give yourself a chance to do that, that's a success. I'm talking about not coming out of the West. It's like you're not going to change any of those things. Those are things that are just going to take time, and like you might make a move or two along the fringes with a Cam Johnson type or something like that. But yeah, when we talk about windows, I mean, when you look at the ages of the big three, when you look at just the cap sheet is so clean at this point. Yeah, eventually they're going to have to pay all these guys. That's going to be on ownership to keep this core together. But under the new CBA, they can do that. And then you look at all the picks and their track record with, drafting no matter where it's at. Like you could not have a better situation set up for the long term. Again, that doesn't mean that an injury won't happen. That doesn't mean that a guy won't get upset. That doesn't mean that someone's game could just fall off. All these things, though, are, things you can't plan ahead for. But right now it's like we almost need the Mavericks revealed a weakness in the Thunder. Right now, there doesn't look like there is a weakness. If they lose in the playoffs, maybe it'll be clear like, oh, yeah, this clearly needs to be addressed. And then they make a move in the offseason. I think they're going to come back next year even better.
We'll see what that move has to be. And we'll talk about what we think could be the questions left to be answered for this team, even as they have a historically great start. We're back on the Lockdown Thunder podcast, on the Lockdown Podcast Network, your teams every day. Joining us today is Joe Mussatto of the Oklahoman, the old columnist over there at the Oklahoman, ripping teams to shreds, praising teams when they're good, really laying down the law in the old black and white ink. Joe, Joe, when we look at this team, let's try to figure out, for as great as they've been, let's try to poke holes in this. And the first question is the same question that national people have. What if their shooters don't shoot well in the playoffs? And that would obviously unravel them. And that's sort of a thing where we don't have to spend a ton of time on that subject because they're either going to shoot it or not. And there's not really any indicators that will tell us that they will or won't because they're all catching fire right now. The last 15 games, they've been a really good shooting team, especially the last 3 games, which is a small sample size, but they've been good shooting the basketball. So we won't know until we know. And so like, there's nothing proactively we can rant and rave about on that subject. I do think that they've given themselves a really good chance though, to overcome that weakness because they're not just relying on the Shai drive and kick stuff, which teams were able to take away. Because yes, in the regular season, Shai could just drive and kick a team to death because they're not going to attack hard closeouts on shooters. In the playoffs, the defensive intensity rises, and once they started attacking on those closeouts, the Thunder were a little bit of a deer in headlights. Whereas this season, they're running plays and they're throwing pin down screens, they're running DHOs, they're doing all this stuff to free up shooters, regardless of what the defense is dictating, to where that stuff can translate more in the postseason with more movement shooting than versus just the stationary catch and shoot stuff. So we'll just see. Like that's what they're gambling on. We'll see if they're right or wrong. Number 2 is the point you brought up of J-Dub, and he was not good offensively. He was excellent defensively in the playoffs last year.
Yeah.
He was not good offensively. And the question would be, can one of J-Dub or Chet become a bona fide co-star on the offensive end?
Yeah, and I think it's going to have to be Dub, at least for this year. I still like Chet's upside better. Again, I say it over and over. I think he is the second best player on the team. Valuable asset, I don't know, because then you get into some injury stuff. But, you know, as he continues to work himself back, like I think Dub has to be that second guy, that second option, take some of the stress off of Shai, not hemorrhage points when Shai is not on the floor, and being able to run those second units. There's less pressure in the playoffs just because there's not going to be many of those times where Shai is off the floor. But this has been an interesting season for Dub because obviously the efficiency is down, but I think the Thunder likes that. Like he's being more aggressive. I think he's gotten better at drawing fouls. You know, he can score it from every level, and maybe being a better playmaker is like kind of the last thing he really has to conquer. But defensively, he's elite. But yeah, we just don't know. I mean, it's a whole different ball game from the regular season to the playoffs. Dub had an outstanding regular season last year and didn't quite live up to it offensively in that second round against the Mavs, and we'll see if he does it this year.
We will see if he's able to pull that off this season. Another question will just be, you know, how can you score whenever Shai's not on the floor? And this is a situation that's been stagnant, and it does tie into Chet and J-Dub because they will play some without Shai. It's only going to be like 8 minutes in the playoffs at most, you'd imagine.
Yeah.
But they'll play some still. And to me, this Thunder team is so good and their defense is so good. Even with Shai off the floor, their defense remains consistent to where all you have to do, and this is why you're so confident in picking the Thunder, is all you have to do is just stay afloat. Don't sink. Don't drop like a rock in the water down all the way down to the bottom. But if you can stay afloat, and especially if you can find a way to swim, you'll be able to win a lot of games. You'll be able to win 4 before the other team wins 4 in a playoff series. And so can you find enough on that end without Shai to just stay above water?
Yeah, and like having Chet back is enormous for that, just because the team gets naturally deeper. And, you know, Hartenstein is going to be in some of those lineups, and he is such an awesome offensive hub and offensive rebounder, and just kind of the 2-man game he has on those dribble handoffs with Isaiah Joe. Some of that is just like quick points you can easily manufacture. It's just a matter of make or miss. But yeah, you know, if they can play even in the non-Shai minutes, that's like a huge win. I wouldn't even expect that in the playoffs. It's just like they can't allow these like 12-2 runs, and then they're digging themselves out of a hole when Shai comes back in.
Yeah, that's a certainty. And then my last one, and if you have any more, you throw them out there too, Joe. But my last one would be, can Chet get back in an offensive rhythm before the playoffs? And what's crazy is through 2 games, and we're recording this before the Minnesota game, which I assume he'll play in on the second night of back-to-back because he's not playing on the front end. Through 2 games, he's already elite defensively. Like, he's already back on the defensive end. That's crazy to me of how good he is on that end of the floor. Offensively, it's still a feel it out process. You're still trying to figure out what things look like, but it's so imperative for this Thunder team to have him get back, because before the injury, Joe, he took a massive leap offensively. He was able to play off the catch more, take you off the dribble more, and do the things that you need him to do come playoff time at a much higher clip than he did a year ago. And then he got hurt, and now you have to kind of do this wait and see game. I think that he can, just because of how he responds to adversity. They credited his body of, like, he came back before the Thunder timeline that they gave us. And Mark said that's a testament to just how his body responded, which is why he beat their evaluation. And so I really am looking at the first few games after this All-Star break, because he's gotten his feet wet. He's played at least 2 games. He should be playing this 3rd game. You'll know this before we do. He'll play 3 games. And then you have this week off of like a session where they're going to have like this mini training camp that they can run with the team and get everybody back on the same page and get him back closer to that return to performance that Mark was talking about. And then out of the All-Star break, can you continue to feel things out? Can you continue to find your rhythm? Because if he can get back to what he was, or even close to what he was in those first 10 games, Joey, this is quite the ball club, huh?
I'm with you though on just real quick on the defensive end. I've heard a lot of people say, like, yeah, you can really see the rust. I've sort of been the opposite defensive. Like, I think it's crazy that the guy broke something in his hip and like still has like is still a monster around the rim, and like his defensive instincts haven't gone away. His timing on just blocking shots. But yeah, offensively, I'm with you. In those 10 games he played, he really showed something off the bounce, just being more comfortable in his overall offensive game. What's so hard with this Thunder team is they played so well without him, and I know the playoffs is a different ball game. It's like, how much more do they need from him offensively? Do they need him to get back to that guy he was pre-injury? And I don't know. Like, if his major asset offensively is like being a floor spacing 5 and knocking down threes, it's like that might be all they need, because Shai has been so good, and if Dub does take that leap, it's just like you're almost playing an either or game. You need one of J-Dub or Chet to really find their groove offensively, because both of those guys struggled at times in that Mavs series. You just can't have where like both of them are off at the same time.
Hopefully, for the Thunder's sake, that does not happen. But Joe, we've gone through some questions. We've gone through some successes. At the All-Star break, with the trade deadline behind us, it might be silly to ask you this because we've kind of discussed it, but are the Thunder going to win the Western Conference?
Yeah, I think they will. I don't want to make some like NBA Finals prediction, but I think, at this, yeah, you can't make an argument unless, I guess, it's experience and they haven't been there before. But just like on paper, when you look at everything, when you look at the depth of this team, when you look at the way Shai has played, now having Chet come back and how dominant they've been defensively, yeah, right now I would pick them to come out of the West.
Picking them to come out of the West, and we're going to be heading to the East Coast, Joe, if they were able to.
We're going to get into some trouble, Rylan.
Oh, trust me. I'll be getting in a lot of trouble in the playoffs, because we're going to be at the playoff series, you and me, Joe. We're going to go to them all. All I'm hoping for is no LA, not for any basketball reasons, but because of my bank account cannot handle LA living. So
yeah, I wouldn't mind another Dallas series or a Houston series or Memphis, even something that's drivable.
I would love a Memphis series. Selfishly, I want the Thunder to play Memphis so bad, because Joe, we road trip over to Memphis. We go to Graceland. Are you kidding me? We got a Sun record. Oh, come on, Joe. Come on. I'd be in heaven. I'd be in heaven.
You got to bring your Elvis posters with you.
I will.
Put them up in the hotel room.
I will. We're staying in Graceland, by the way, if they go and play the Grizzlies. So get ready to.
Do you think you actually would stay in Graceland? I
Well,
don't think you
they have a
would.
Graceland hotel
Okay.
on the property.
Is Graceland like its own? I'm about to show my ignorance. Is Graceland its own like city town, or is it like in Memphis? Is it just his home in
It's
Memphis?
just his it's just his home. It's just his
Okay.
home for the most part. But yeah, you can go tour it though, and we're gonna do that. So get ready.
We are
ready.
and we're gonna watch another Elvis movie.
We are, and you know what? The Elvis movie behind me right here, Girl Happy. That's Barry Trammell's favorite Elvis movie. It's not my favorite Elvis movie, but
the three of us and whoever else wants to join.
yeah, and then we can watch. I have another Elvis movie poster that you can't see right now. Roustabout. That's my favorite movie. We can watch that one. I got Joe to watch Viva Las Vegas in Dallas. So
wow,
it's our new playoff tradition.
A double showing.
A double feature. Yeah,
double feature. I was looking for the right term. All I could think of was showing, but it is a double feature.
Yeah, double feature on Turner Classic Movie, which I have them all recorded on YouTube TV, so we'll be able to knock that all out. And then Joe, on the road trip to Memphis, we're gonna be blasting some Elvis. So
yeah,
you
gotta really blast that.
Oh, you gotta blast it. Are you kidding me, Joe? I can't wait.
How old are those people?
Yeah. Whenever a car drives by, you can hear their radio, and we drive by, and you just hear Elvis, and they're like, "What?" Oh man, it's a far cry from what you normally hear. But Joe, we're gonna get it done. I'm gonna hold you to the road trip to Memphis if the stars align for it. And until next time, be good and be good to one another.